Hey, it's Matt Robeson, and here's our latest episode of Political Rehab, our mashup of PTI and The Daily Show, where a Republican named Matt and me, a Democrat also named Matt, have a great time hitting the top stories and blasting Trump and doing our weekly That's Bullshit segment, and always ending with a dose of hope. Please hit subscribe to support this kind of work here on Worth Knowing with Matt Robeson, and come back every week, 12:30 for the show. And just so you know, I'm live with you right now. But the rest of this episode was recorded earlier, which you'll be able to tell because we talk about the deal on DHS funding right before the Senate passed a bill. But that doesn't change anything that we're discussing here in the episode. With that, here we go.
It's going to piss off every single Republican that watches this show.
The real story going on here is not that the system broke. It's that the chaos is being used as a negotiating tactic.
It's not the No Kings protest that's going to be the Republican demise.
Democrats may have finally figured out the missing ingredient in their entire political strategy: hotness. Welcome to Political Rehab. I'm Matt Robeson, Democrat and former congressional staffer.
And I'm Matt Wiley, Republican campaign strategist.
Today, an all-out brawl over Homeland Security, the Supreme Court about to completely upend voting, showdown in the Strait of Hormuz, markets and POTUS, who's manipulating whom, a MAHA divorce, plus are the No Kings protests about to fail and hang on for the end for Democrats' sexy new strategy? Really? But let's start as always with our Trump dump.
Time for the Trump dump.
That's right. It's time for the Trump dump because it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. There's something Donald Trump did this week that pissed you off.
This past week, Senate Republicans were quietly working to try to end the shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security by working behind the scenes with Senate Democrats to meet their demands and find compromises. Remember that we're in this impasse because ICE officers went on an illegal rampage terrorizing not just immigrants but American citizens, detaining Native Americans because they look vaguely Latino, abducting citizens off the streets, breaking into cars, breaking illegally into homes without warrants, tear gassing and pepper spraying and abusing people in their homes and businesses, and murdering 2 American citizens in Minnesota alone. Senate Democrats refused to continue to provide any funding for the Department of Homeland Security, which includes ICE, as part of the regular congressional funding bill, unless serious reforms were put in place to protect us all from this paramilitary goon squad. Some Republicans have been holding the Trump line by calling Democrats' reasonable demands crazy and unacceptable for things like officers should actually have warrants before breaking into people's homes, and we should actually train these people for longer than 6 weeks. But to their credit, some Republicans have been trying to end the standoff and move forward. Senate Majority Leader John Thune even offered President Trump a proposal to fund all of the Department of Homeland Security except for ICE, which would potentially unlock Democratic support. That would mean we could start to pay TSA agents and end the incredibly long lines that have started forming at airports and doing all of the other critical functions of the Department of Homeland Security that is supposed to, after all, keep us safe. But several days ago, Trump not only refused that offer, but he also ordered Republican senators to stay in Washington and not go home for Easter, warning that he would publicly tear them apart if they left. He added, quote, "Come to Easter dinner at the White House." Now, if that feels ominous, like a prelude to the dinner scene in The Untouchables where Al Capone beats an underling with a baseball bat, rest assured that Republican senators took it exactly the same way. They told reporters on Background that they took it as a threat, not a reward. Just to be clear, this is a crisis of Donald Trump's making. He made the mess. He's already had to fire his first cabinet official of this term by sending Kristi Noem packing. His public approval on immigration, which was previously Republicans' strongest issue in public polling, has absolutely cratered, gone underwater, and Republican senators are trying to bail him out. They're saying, help us, help you, and he's become such a small-minded buffoon of a tyrant that not only did he slap their hand away, he actually managed to threaten them for the attempt. And for this supposed Christian, who still polls bafflingly and extraordinarily well among evangelicals, the fact that the threat was tied to the holiest day on the Christian calendar simply cannot be topped for irony and oxymoronic behavior. On second thought, hold the oxy.
We were told mail-in voting would break the system. Fraud, chaos, rigged elections. That was the case. And now Trump just voted by mail. The same guy calling it cheating just used it himself. Fine, we're used to hypocrisy in Washington, and he's the president of the United States. Of course, he's not standing in line at a polling place while Secret Service shuts the whole thing down. But why the all-out assault on mail-in voting? Here's the thing, mail-in voting works. Older voters, rural voters, people who don't have easy access to polling places, that's our coalition. And now this idiotic push to restrict it, to stigmatize it, to make it harder is going to backfire on Republicans, which are increasingly dependent upon voters who use mail-in voting to win elections. Why? To stop fraud? Okay, let's talk about fraud. There's a case in Wisconsin where a conservative activist tried to game the system with mail-in ballots. And you know what happened? He got caught. He got prosecuted. He got convicted. The system worked. Fraud isn't zero. Nothing is. But it's rare. It's traceable. And when people try it, they get nailed. You cannot baby-proof democracy. You don't shut down a system that works to stop a problem that isn't deciding elections. Because elections aren't decided by fraud. They're decided by turnout. And if you start cutting off a voting method your own voters depend on, voting methods that Trump himself uses, you're not protecting the system. You're shrinking our own coalition. Meanwhile, the Democrats, they're banking votes early, locking them in. They're playing to win. We're out here debating whether our voters should even use the system. That's not election integrity. That's self-sabotage. If mail-in voting was really breaking the system, Trump wouldn't be using it. It's not the problem. It's just the latest villain. And if Republicans keep chasing the wrong villain, we're going to lose the majority because of it.
Let's get to our rundown. The Department of Homeland Security shutdown has now turned from a Washington fight into an everyday visible mess. Airport lines are exploding, TSA officers are quitting, and the administration's answer is to send ICE agents into airports. That matters not just because it's chaotic and weird, but because it tells you exactly how Trump governs. Create the crisis, reject the off-ramp, then use the chaos as leverage to demand something even more extreme, as I just covered in my Trump dump. The bottom line is they had an off-ramp. They chose the pile up. Matt, is there a strategy going on?
There doesn't appear to be a strategy whatsoever. This seems to be an absolute complete mess. First problem here is Trump seems to be using ICE as his own personal paramilitary force. That's just un-American. How we do things in America is equally as important as what we do. And the next problem is that with no real solution, Republicans are going to get blamed for this. We have a Republican Congress, a Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican president. I don't care how much we as Republicans try to blame the Democrats. This has fallen straight on our lap.
I completely agree. Reuters reported this week, TSA resignations have now topped 480 since the shutdown began. Absenteeism is up over 11% nationally. And obviously, travelers are taking the heat. The TSA administrator, Ha Nguyen McNeil, said that the shutdown has produced the longest airport wait times on record. The real story going on here is not that the system broke. It's that the chaos is being used as a negotiating tactic. And that is exactly what we're seeing in the other story that we're going to cover, Iran. This is Trump's MO, which is make a giant mess, use the resulting chaos as a way to try to say, look, there's a big problem going on here. Someone's got to fix it. It's your fault. The burden is on you. He's saying that to our European allies. He's saying that to our military members whose bodies and lives are on the line for the war that he started. He's saying it to the American people with gas prices. I know we're talking about the Homeland Security shutdown, but that's his MO. And of course, now we're all facing it in extra costs, extra wait times, extra hassle, and a loss of safety because the Department of Homeland Security does a hell of a lot more than just deploy ICE agents as paramilitary goons around the country to terrorize American citizens.
I don't want shorter TSA lines to be at the expense of liberty. And I think that's something that should really be a big problem. And the fact that Trump's so willing to do it and that we're not even having that conversation in America should be alarming to everyone. The Supreme Court looks ready to side with Republicans and limit ballots that arrive after Election Day, even if they're postmarked on time. Now, this could hit 14 plus states immediately with ripple effects across the country right before the midterms. You've worked on countless elections. I've worked on countless elections. What do you make of this potential ruling by the Supreme Court?
This has become a debate not about whether people voted. It's a debate about whether their votes are still going to count, because elections are administered by the states. States have said you have safe harbor. As long as you get it in the mailbox, if we're going to allow voting by mail, as long as you get it in the mailbox on election day, it's out of your hands and it's not your responsibility. It's the Postal Service's responsibility, and therefore your vote can still count. That's super important for our military service members deployed overseas who rely on that grace period and that postmark date in order to get their valid American citizen guaranteed votes to count. So this is basically a legalistic strategy in search of trying to erase votes, because Trump has decided, and you covered this in your Trump dump, Trump has decided that he's against mail-in voting, even though he himself avails himself of this privilege. And what it comes down to for Republicans is, if you can't win more votes, you start litigating the clock.
Look, a lot of Republicans feel election day should be election day and that there should be a hard cutoff. There has to be an end to the game. The NFL has an end to the game. Everybody has an end to the game. The thing is, we can't keep moving that target. And we've all had problems with the mail. We know there's problems with delivery. And as Republicans, we want to see those things delivered on time. But the thing is, just like you said, if we cut it off on election day and we don't give that grace for the ballots, and for right now, it is postmarked by midnight on election day is typically the rule. If we don't give that grace, we are going to lose elections because we're taking away an important measure that allows them to cast ballots. But now we're telling them, if you waited till the day before and you tried to vote, but it doesn't get here the very next day, we're just not going to count your ballot. And that to me also feels very much un-American, because we should be counting ballots that are made before election day.
I respect what you're saying about there has to be an end line somewhere, right? If we want to look at this together as a country and come up with a uniform set of rules the states can agree on, make sure they're clear, everyone understands, right. I could be okay with that. It is time to start talking about Iran. In the span of just a few days in this past week, President Trump said that the Iran war might be, quote, winding down, then threatened to obliterate Iran's energy infrastructure. That's how you wind down a war. If the Strait of Hormuz was not effectively reopened, then he abruptly delayed that ultimatum while claiming productive talks that Iran publicly gave him the Heisman on and said, that is not what is happening. In fact, we have a counter demand of these 5 points that you will find completely unacceptable. This isn't just erratic messaging. It's a recipe for strategic confusion in one of the most economically sensitive choke points on earth. And it's beginning to become a story of a showdown in the Strait of Hormuz over this key economic and geopolitical asset. I mean, again, this is the same prompt I gave you before, Matt, but tell me there's a strategy here on the part of the President of the United States.
There's not. There's still not. It feels like it is flying by the seat of his pants. And I'm going to say something's going to piss off every single Republican that watches this show. This is the same draw a red line crap that we were angry with when Obama did it, that we were angry with it when other presidents have done it, and Donald Trump just did it. He drew a red line in the sand, and then they let Iran do whatever they want to go do. You can't negotiate like that. Now it just feels like you're just trying to make up things to change the market, to make some money for you, and we're going to get into that in a little bit later. The reality is, though, strength without a strategy is just escalation. And that's what we're seeing here, is we're constantly out there trying to push, be the biggest guy on the block. But then when push comes to shove, we back down, and it's just causing a headache for our allies. It's causing a headache for Americans. It's going to cost more lives. It's going to cause more problems for us in the long run.
Unpredictability is not the same thing as strength. And Donald Trump seems to be confused about it. Now, to be clear, it is a negotiating tactic. Name drop here, okay? I took the Harvard Business School course on negotiations. And this is one of the key negotiating tactics that they teach high-level corporate executives. Be unpredictable, because it makes your counterparty unsure of their footing, more apt to take your offers because they don't know what's going to happen next. That can be a tactic, but I've seen no evidence that Trump is deploying this tactically. Again, it goes back to the leitmotif that's run through this entire show, that Trump's MO is to create chaos and expect other people to clean up his messes the same way he bankrupted his company 6 times and then expected to be bailed out by the bankruptcy laws. This is just the way he operates.
And that's where we get in our next topic, the market volatility. Because markets swung after Trump paused planned strikes and claimed that productive conversations with Iran. Iran denied the talks were happening. Iran has rejected the deal. The 15-point plan that Trump was put out raises some serious questions about whether markets are reacting to real policy or just message driving the markets and saying, Matt, what are you seeing happening there?
What I see happening is this very unsettling aspect of this, which is that Trump's decisions increasingly seem to land not just in response to the war or diplomatic actions, but in sync with trading windows. There's new reporting from The Atlantic that shows that some of his biggest foreign policy and tariff moves have lined up with market hours and weekend pauses in ways that are, at minimum, awfully convenient and potentially exploitable by our adversaries. It's not just insider market manipulation, it's policy being entangled with market theater. And there have been known cases, let's not forget, of people cleaning up in the prediction markets, Polymarket and Kalshi, with conveniently timed bets around administration war decisions. You're seeing this very unholy and unwholesome link between markets and policy decisions that are as consequential as life and death, peace and war. And the danger here is that the more markets drive Trump's decisions, the easier it is for our adversaries to drive him through the markets. Iran, our adversaries, can manipulate the president of the United States by just thinking about the effect on markets that he's desperately and very obviously trying to keep a lid on through his messaging and his actions here. He is being driven by the stock market and potentially by advisors who are cashing in on prediction markets on his decisions. There cannot be a good outcome from that.
And it begins to trickle down. Trump is being manipulated by all these outside forces or even inside forces inside the White House. Now we have an affordability problem. Now we have gas prices going through the roof. Now we have fertilizer issues and our crops are in danger. And so what's happening is this chaos here, this absolute unbridled chaos is now going to trickle down to what every American is starting to feel. And it is going to impact us all in the elections as Republicans, but it's going to create an economy that's going to be so hard to move forward with. Maybe well into another president's term before we start seeing some stability back.
And I didn't realize, speaking of cabinet turnover, that Donald Trump had decided to make the stock ticker a cabinet advisor. Speaking of problems inside the MAGA cabinet, there is a quiet but very real crack opening inside Trump's coalition. The White House appears to want to move on from vaccine discussion because the politics have become so clearly terrible for Republicans, while the MAHA movement, that's Make America Healthy Again, in a new frontier in irony naming, the MAHA movement around RFK Jr. does not want to let the issue go. The tension matters because it's one of the first places where Trump's electoral instincts and the ideological demands of his own coalition are visibly pulling in different directions, and that means pulling the Republican coalition apart. You are clearly a fan of this.
Ripping that coalition apart is what it's doing right now. Trump needed this coalition, and it really grew out of COVID and the lockdown periods where a lot of people were very unhappy with what was going on in schools and education. And that movement then sort of grew into a lot of what we now see in MAHA. Trump is willing to throw that aside right now to move on past the vaccine conversations because there are the political ramifications nationally in what he's doing, but we're going to rip that coalition apart at the same time. The common thread of everything we're talking about today is the absolute chaos that is happening. And this chaos and the bad policy is catching up with Trump. And now he just doesn't know which way to go. And we're going to continue to peel away that coalition that Republicans need. Because one, we were so wackadoodle on one side with RFK Jr., and now by sort of trying to push that under the rug, we're just going to make it difficult.
The whole situation is beginning to seem to me like if you've ever rented out a room in your house, or like you have an in-law apartment over your garage and you have tenants, and at first you're like, oh, this is great. Rental income. This is perfect. I love that sweet money coming in every month. But then you realize, hold on, They're doing a lot of drugs and they're playing like really strange loud music at 12:30 at night, and the cops are coming all the time, and this is becoming more of a problem than it's worth. That is essentially what's happened in this unholy alliance between MAGA and MAHA, and I'm just looking for at least the tenant to get evicted. Speaking of really tenuous political situations, it's time to take a deep dive into what might be the biggest political story that's going to dominate the next few days.
Let's go beyond the headlines. It's time for a deep dive.
Millions of Americans are protesting this weekend at No Kings rallies across the country, and this may set the record for the biggest protest in American history. But here's the real question we need to ask honestly. Do protests work? In other words, do they actually change anything? And the answer is sometimes, but not necessarily in the way that the No Kings movement is going about it right now, because I've actually looked at the numbers. And I wrote about this after the last round of No Kings protests, and I think we can put our finger on what they're getting right, what they haven't done yet that could still make them succeed, and what exactly the next step should be. So let's look at the first question. Do protests work? There's actually a huge body of research on this. Professors Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan at the Harvard Kennedy School have shown that some protest movements have led to measurable change, and there are two principles that make them more likely to succeed. First, nonviolent movements are twice as likely to succeed as violent ones, and you've seen some examples. There was a tangible connection during the civil rights movement between protest marches, especially the 1963 March on Washington, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Vietnam War protests seem to have played a role in flipping public opinion, with Gallup showing support for the war dropping from around 60% in 1965 to under 30% in the early 1970s. And second, if you engage a big share of the population in your movement, you're also a lot more likely to achieve change. This is where the so-called 3.5% rule comes from, and you may have heard of it. Dr. Chenoweth's finding, based on a review of hundreds of campaigns from around the world over the past century, is that it takes around 3.5% of the population actively participating in a protest movement to achieve political change. But here's the problem. People treat that like it's a rule of physics. It's really not. As Dr. Chenoweth says, she recommends looking at the 3.5% as a rule of thumb, not an iron law. Just bringing large numbers of people to the streets might not work. Dr. Chenoweth's collaborator, Mary Stephen, points to hundreds of other nonviolent methods that you have to do at the same time in order for mass protests to work. Economic boycotts, labor strikes, political and social non-cooperation. They're all part of a critical formula. Just engaging lots of people in a mass demonstration is like sending out invitations to a birthday party, but forgetting to get the cake, candles, or presents. It's going to be pretty lame. Or as Chenoweth puts it, mass participation alone becomes a loud but ineffective minority. So let's bring this back to No Kings. I want to be clear that they're doing a lot right. Getting millions of people to show up is genuinely impressive. Setting a record for mass demonstrations in America is no small feat. And as I wrote back in October, I think I'm not alone in feeling bolstered by seeing how many other Americans are just as pissed off as I am. But in terms of what has actually changed after the last two rounds of record-breaking protests, the clear answer was not that much. I actually showed this by breaking it down to 4 questions back in October. First, did the No Kings protest drive greater public opposition to Donald Trump or his policies? And the answer was clearly no. After the first round of No Kings protests on June 14, 2025, Trump's approval actually went up and his disapproval went down. There's simply been no lingering impact on views of the president from either round of protests. Number 2, did Trump or his allies change their behavior or cancel any of their plans because of the protests? No. All of Trump's troop deployments to Chicago and Washington, D.C., the government shutdown, the deepfake videos of dropping feces on protesters, that all followed the first round of No Kings protests. The operation in Venezuela, the outrageous actions of ICE in Minnesota, and now the war with Iran all followed the second round of No Kings protests. Number 3, did any other institutions or private companies or nonprofits change their behavior because of the protests? No. Can you think of a single corporation, organization, media outlet, or school that's changed their plans or started resisting Trump because of those protests? Number 4, is there any evidence that the protests are meaningfully affecting the likelihood of defeating Trump or his allies in the next election? Unfortunately, the answer here is no as well. There's no evidence that No Kings protests are effectively being used to raise money for anti-Trump candidates or register voters or get people to commit to voting or to any mobilization of any kind. And again, there's no evidence that the protests are changing political views either. But to be clear, I'm not trying to be overly harsh. There's a legitimate argument that keeping things broad and mobilizing as many people as possible under a simple banner of opposition to Trump's administration is a necessary first step. They've done it, and they've been very successful at it. So now, if they want to be effective, it's past time for this protest movement to pivot. And here's the opportunity for No Kings and for anyone who generally agrees with No Kings. Don't just protest. Also take the next step. Turn all of this energy and emotion into something tangible, something real. It's like going to a casino and winning a bunch of chips at the blackjack table. It feels great, but it's not real money until you go and cash in. And the good news for No Kings protesters or for any protest movement is we actually know the way to do that. Mary Stephen gave a hint that I mentioned earlier. Economic boycotts, strikes, institutional pressure. Those are the tools that make people change behavior. We've seen it work recently. 6 months ago, when the Trump administration and his FCC henchman, Brendan Carr, tried to muscle ABC into pulling Jimmy Kimmel's show off the air for speech they didn't like, people reacted with economic pressure. Google searches for how to cancel Disney Plus spiked. As a result, Disney stock dropped 2%. Suddenly, people who were outraged by the Trump administration had a target. And it followed a rule that I call the 3 Fs. It was focused because there was one target and a clear demand. It was financial because there was an immediate and measurable business cost to the target. And the target was fragile because Disney Plus is a critical long-term strategic asset for the company. And losing subscribers and the cutthroat streaming wars hit a soft spot. Companies and other institutions respond to loss of revenue, to damage to their brand, and public pressure. And the key insight we can learn from all of that is that one visible loss creates fear and deterrence for everyone else. Right now, the No Kings protests are like sunlight passing through a pane of glass. The light and the heat are diffuse. But now it's time to turn it into a lens. Put the magnifying glass on one target to find one action, coordinate, make a visible impact, and then move to the next target. One action, one target, one moment. The challenge, of course, is that me saying this on Substack or on this YouTube video doesn't just make it happen. Though, if this video goes viral, that would sure help. And you taking a moment right now to like it, subscribe to this channel, and share the video would be amazing. But the good news is that we actually have a coordinating organization who can make it happen. One that's convening millions and millions of Americans. So, if the people who are protesting this weekend are ready to take the next step, that's it. Engage in your own mobilization and write to the No Kings organization and tell them that you want them to do 2 things for the next 2 months. First, organize the next set of protests, but also make them a voter engagement and mobilization drive. Get people registered, get people committed to voting, and get people committed to volunteering to reach other voters. And second, pick a target. As Maverick said to Goose, it's a target-rich environment. Define a simple, clear economic action that we can all take together. For Americans who want a change in direction in our government, we'll get an opportunity at that in the midterm elections, but before that, we can still change the behavior of other companies and institutions if we work together. That's how protest movements win. So, Matt, obviously I laid out the case there. I have strong feelings, and obviously I'm in alignment with the No Kings protesters. I believe in their message. I believe what they're trying to do. To some degree, you do as well, because you are not a fan of Trump, even though you are a fan of the Republican Party and you work in and are a vowed member of the Republican Party. What's your view on the No Kings protests, and what do you make of my case that they need to pivot in order to make themselves effective?
If I take off my partisan hat here and I just talk about the pure strategy, you made an excellent point in that intro video here. Look, the one problem with the No Kings protests has always been the mixed messaging. It's all the different signs that are there. And I guarantee you, I'm going to see a sign that says defund ICE, and that just kills the movement. I get it. I've tried to put together big rallies. You're just getting anybody you can show up, but you try to always coordinate around one thing. And I think that's the single biggest problem, because if your average voter is driving down the street and they see defund ICE or they see some of this random messaging that's out there, they just keep driving. It doesn't appeal to them. It doesn't work. The second thing that I think, and you touched on this when you talked about the need to go register people to vote, I would take it one step further. I would take it to a point of saying, okay, utilize social media, add a call to action right there. And this is where I think the No Kings movement really does fail, in the sense that it never brings it home. It just looks like a big crowd that never does it. Now, from the bigger political perception, I do think it has impact. Republicans who look at this and try to just dismiss this as a left-wing rally that they're not our votes anywhere are gravely missing the point, because there are people in there that are not just Democrats who are just fed up. And maybe they voted for Trump or in the midterms, and maybe they voted for the Republican last time. We're seeing this all over the country. We're seeing in that Florida election on Mar-a-Lago, where a Democrat is winning in what has been historically a Republican backyard. That's because people are getting tired of what's happening. They're getting frustrated. They're getting upset. Whereas I think this No Kings protest is not as effective as it could or should be. From a bigger level, you're starting to see that it's another sign Republicans are struggling, that this coalition is cracking, it's crumbling. And I think when you write the story of Republican losses this midterm, part of it has to be this growing No Kings rally.
I think there's a danger of reversing our understanding of cause and effect. When the story is written of what we anticipate to be Republican losses, we're going to say that frustration grew, and that led to Republican losses, and it led to No Kings protests. It's not the other way around. It's not that No Kings protests led to the defeat of Trump, his allies, and his agenda.
Correct. Correct.
Drives me a little bit crazy, because you're an active political consultant. I used to manage congressional campaigns. I used to be a surrogate as a congressional chief of staff for my boss on the campaign trail. What that means, I'm not like carrying someone's baby. That just means I'd go out and I'd speak on their behalf. And I'd go to organizations in various towns, and I would stand up and I'd have a crystal clear message that we had thought a lot about. This is the way we need to talk to people to move the votes that we need to move to win. And I'd stand up, and then some town chair wouldn't hear the things that were on their mind, and they'd say, oh, and you didn't talk about this and this and this and this. And that's the effect you're going to see with the signs at these protests. They're all over the people are invited. Make your own signs. My son helped my mother-in-law to make signs, and it's great. Like, you've got a 10-year-old political advisor for my mother-in-law who's very astute, very smart, very active, and very committed to all of this. But the question is, how can we create that lens? How can we take all of that light and turn it into heat? How do we focus it into action? There has to be an effective call to action in any protest movement. That's the difference between the March on Washington in 1963 and the No Kings protest. The March on Washington is dwarfed in size by the No Kings protests. But the March on Washington was a hell of a lot more effective.
You're absolutely right. It's not the No Kings protest that's going to be the Republican demise, but it's going to be that Republicans decided to dismiss that angst and that problem, and it's their own sort of problem. If they could find a way to turn this into meaningful action, it's just right now it's so fractious that I think you're right. It just looks like a big crowd.
Speaking of strong propellant forces, let's get to this week's edition of That's Bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
A bullshit?
Military operation. I won't use the word war.
President Trump just did it again. He said the quiet part out loud. In a speech this week, he was trying to substitute the term military operation for war, but the very stable genius has such jumbled thinking that first, he admits that part of the reason he's doing it is that this whole war is unauthorized by Congress and therefore illegal.
They don't like the word war because you're supposed to get approval, so I'll use the word military operation.
The real problem with swapping terms is that it's a form of rhetorical bullshit. It comes out of a long American tradition of trying to sanitize the horror of war or anything that we might find unpleasant or objectionable. Of course, Trump can't help himself. So in the very next breath, after calling it a military operation, he reveals what he'd really like to call it.
It's called a military decimation.
because Admiral Bone Spurs himself has spent the last year, and really his whole life, cosplaying as a tough guy and insisting that the military is all about war.
We decided to go woke and we changed the name to Department of Defense, so we're going Department of War.
So, just to keep all the bullshit straight, the Department of War is all about
lethality, lethality, lethality.
Except when the war is illegal and deeply unpopular, and then it's time to bring in the multisyllabic euphemisms to try to obscure what's going on. Like I said, this comes out of a long tradition. George Orwell, in his classic essay, Politics and the English Language, warned that political speech and writing are largely the defense of the indefensible, accomplished by inflating syllables and adding complexity in order to erase concrete clarity. No one captured this more brilliantly in the context of war than one of the greatest comedians of the 20th century, George Carlin, who took us through the evolution of a simple term.
There's a condition in combat, most people know about it. It's when a fighting person's nervous system has been stressed to its absolute peak and maximum, can't take any more input. In the First World War, that condition was called shell shock. Simple, honest, direct language, 2 syllables, shell shock. Almost sounds like the guns.
But by the Second World War,
the very same combat condition was called battle fatigue. 4 syllables now. Takes a little longer to say. Doesn't seem to hurt as much. Fatigue is a nicer word than shock. Shell shock. Battle fatigue.
And by the Korean War, once the Madison Avenue executives had gotten involved,
the very same combat condition was called operational exhaustion. Hey, we're up to 8 syllables now. And the humanity has been squeezed completely out of the phrase. It's totally sterile now. Operational exhaustion. Sounds like something that might happen to your car.
And finally, when we got to the Vietnam War, where the public was deeply divided about what we were doing,
the very same condition was called post-traumatic stress disorder. The pain is completely buried under jargon.
Which is why it's bullshit in its most basic form. It's language deployed to deceive. By removing the emotional impact, there are real-world consequences to how we think about war and what we're willing to do. Or, as Carlin put it,
I'll bet you if we'd have still been calling it shell shock, some of those Vietnam veterans might have gotten the attention they needed at the time. I'll bet you that.
We did it when we called the Korean War a police action, when dead civilians in Vietnam became collateral damage, and in the 2000s, the Bush administration substituted enhanced interrogation techniques for torture and extraordinary rendition for kidnapping. Over the years, the military has used neutralize for kill. The Obama administration described its bombing campaign in Libya as a kinetic military action. Killing your own troops became friendly fire. And in the most awkward example, the Air Force sometimes calls bombing servicing the target. Of course, this kind of thing is at the core of politics and embedded in everything government does. That's what Orwell meant. Here's The Simpsons making fun of it.
I'll have to raise taxes. But in my speech, I'd like to avoid calling it a painful emergency tax. We could call it a temporary refund adjustment.
And more broadly, as Carlin pointed out, this kind of insidious language creep has become a basic part of American life.
Toilet paper became bathroom tissue. Sneakers became running shoes. False teeth became dental appliances. Medicine became medication. Information became directory assistance. The dump became the landfill. Car crashes became automobile accidents. Partly cloudy became partly sunny. Poor people used to live in slums. Now the economically disadvantaged occupy substandard housing in the inner cities.
Look, I get it, and I think you do too. We live in a madman American world where we're selling products and ideas to each other, and we want to dress them up as nicely as we can. It doesn't hurt anyone to call it bathroom tissue because you don't want to remind people of a toilet, or to help people who are broke not feel as bad by treating them with more respectful terms. As long as we don't go overboard, which, let's face it, sometimes we have, it can be a good thing. But when it comes to war, there's a real cost when our government tries to cover over the consequences in a layer of mental slop. And in the case of this particular administration, it's pretty damn rich for them to be releasing war footage mixed with video game footage to make it seem like a lot of bloodless kicking ass. and then chastising the media in the very next breath for focusing on the deaths of American soldiers too much, as I pointed out in a recent edition of That's Bullshit. It's easy for us here to cut through the crap and say it straight out. This is a war, an illegal one. It's resulted in thousands of deaths among Iranians, Americans, and other people in the Middle East. That's simply what it is. So the next time you hear this kind of thing out of the mouth of the administration, maybe you'll join me in having the same reaction that our friend George Carlin did.
Some of this language makes me want to vomit. Well, maybe not vomit. Makes me want to engage in an involuntary personal protein spill.
And now, let's close out as we always do with a dose of hope.
There's a temptation right now to think America's best days are behind us, that things have gotten so bad, so broken, that it's over. It's not. Look at what's actually happening. In Texas, nearly 4.5 million Americans showed up for a primary, a midterm. No national drama, no once-in-a-generation movement, and millions of people still made the effort to vote. In North Carolina, you had hundreds of thousands of voters on each side in a Senate primary. Early voting surged. People didn't wait around. They showed up and they made sure their voice was heard. And then look at something even smaller, a special election in Florida. Off cycle, easy to ignore. About 30,000 people showed up. 30,000. That's people taking time to vote in a race most of the country didn't even notice. That's not apathy. That's people who care about what happens next. You can say the system is messy. You can argue it needs to be fixed. You can even point to everything that's wrong. But step back and look at what people are actually doing. They're participating. They're showing up in primaries. They're voting early. They're engaging in elections that don't have headlines or hype. That's not the end of something. That's proof of something. This country still runs on participation. It always has. And as long as people keep showing up, America still works.
Okay, I'm going to say something that's either incredibly shallow or secretly brilliant. Democrats may have finally figured out the missing ingredient in their entire political strategy: hotness. A new article in the Bulwark reveals that there's a rising discussion among Democrats about not more focus groups or slogans or Elizabeth Warren-esque 10-point policy plans. What if we just rolled out the eye candy? Now, I know this is where smart people might object and say, this is exactly what's wrong with politics: the shallowness, the lack of thought or reason or even emotional appeal. This is why America is going through a process of dumbing. Wait, that's not how you spell dumbing.
Do all Simpsons go through a process of dumbing? Wait, that's not how you spell dumbing.
In other words, isn't this exact kind of thinking how we ended up with a 6-time bankrupted carnival barker of a reality TV wannabe dumbass as our president? Well, yeah, it is, but consider this. Why did we ever think we were going to beat that by rolling out Poindexter from Revenge of the Nerds? Great. We'll win among the AP government class and crush it in the Model UN. What if we fought fire with fire? I know Michelle Obama said when they go low, we go high. But how about when they go low, we go lower but hotter?
Zoolander, a model, idiot.
Exactly. We know we can win voters who want a candidate who looks like they can assign homework, but what if we tried winning voters who just want to swipe right? Wait, do we want to make them swipe left now? Vote for Democrats? Actually, forget it. There I go again, trying to be intellectually coherent. Silly me. I just remembered that there's actual research, including from Gabriel Lentz, a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, who co-authored a study in 2010 that found that the physical appearance of candidates strongly influences voters. Damn it! I can't help myself. I did it again. I just quoted research. Forget all of that. I'm just going to sit here and smize at you until you agree with me. This isn't a great idea. This is the greatest idea Democrats have ever had. And the best part is, you know who it helps the most? Us. This show. What's hotter than a couple of middle-aged white dudes talking about politics? So go with it. Plus up your charisma points, nerds. My dose of hope is that in 2028, we'll see our next Democratic presidential contender strut down the catwalk and lead us back to the White House. And on that hopeful note, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.